We are up.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today at the July 2020 meeting of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill Board of Trustees meeting. As many of us have said over the last several months, this is an unprecedented time, and this meeting certainly no exception. For those of you who may be watching this remotely or participating on Zoom, thank you for being with us and joining us. For those of us here in a different room, rather than our normal place, it's good to be back together again, first time since our January meeting, even with mask and physical distancing, as we will adhere to. A couple of logistics as we get started. First of all, you'll notice a microphone button in front of you. You'll need to press and hold that button the entire time you're speaking. And if you're on Zoom, please mute your microphone unless you are speaking. Also, when you begin to speak or make a motion, please identify yourself. I should have done that. I'm Richard Stevens, the current chair of the board. Under recently enacted amendments to the North Carolina General Statutes concerning virtual meetings, and even though most of us are here, this is still considered a virtual meeting, all votes will have to be by roll call. Additionally, a reminder, all chats, instant messages, text, or other written communications between members of the board regarding the transaction of the public business during this remote meeting are deemed to be a public record. I ask Secretary Teresa Artis-Neal to call the roll.
Ms. Artis-Neal is present. Mr. Bullock?
Present.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Kobe?
Present.
Mr. Cochran?
Present.
Mr. Davis?
Present.
Mr. Duckett?
Here.
Mrs. Hopkins? Mr. McCullen?
Present.
Mr. Meekins?
Present.
Mr. Mosley? Mr. Pryor?
Present.
Mr. Stevens?
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'd now like to call on Trustee and immediate past Chair Haywood Cochran for a report from the nominating committee.
Thank you, Chair Stevens. As many of you know by now, a few weeks ago, Chair Stevens asked me to be part of a nominating committee dealing with the continuity of our officers on the Board of Trustees as well as the Assistant Secretary, a position now held by Clayton Summers. I was ably assisted by Trustee Kelly Hopkins and Trustee Jeff Brown as we attempted to canvass all the members of the Board of Trustees about the leadership that we had experienced over the past year. And I'm happy to say there was broad support for the current slate of nominees and broad approval of the level of leadership. Before we open it up for discussion, I'd like to ask Trustee Hopkins and Trustee Brown if they'd like to add any comments at this point. Hearing none, we'll open it up for discussion. The nominating committee is pleased to nominate the continuity of our leadership team, including Chair Richard Stevens, Vice Chair Gene Davis, Secretary Teresa Artis-Neal, and as I mentioned before, Assistant Secretary Clayton Summers. Any discussion on the nominations?
Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion from Trustee Cochran. Is there a second? Second. There is a second from Trustee Kobe. Further discussion from members of the board? If not, we'll proceed to the roll call vote.
Ms. Artis-Neal? Yes. Mr. Bullock?
Yes.
Mr. Brown? Mr. Cochran?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Duckett?
Yes.
Mrs. Hopkins? Mr. McCullen?
Yes.
Mr. Meekins?
Yes.
Mr. Mosley? Mr. Pryor?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Thinking about it. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Chairman Cochran. Thank you, members of the committee. Thank you, board members. I do appreciate and thank you for your support in reelecting all of us as your officers this next year. It's been an incredible honor to serve and work with you. We've had challenges, we're going to have challenges, but I'm just confident that together we're going to accomplish great things together in the year ahead. I want to thank Trustee Davis and Artis Neal for their continued role as Chair and Secretary, Vice Chair and Secretary, and of course Clayton Summers for his continued work with us as our Assistant Secretary. Let me read the ethics statement. As Chair of the Board of Trustees, it's my responsibility to remind all members of the Board of their duty under the State Government Ethics Act to avoid conflicts of interest and appearances of conflicts of interest as required by this Act. Each member has received the agenda and related information for this trustees meeting. If any board member knows of any conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to any matter coming before the Board of Trustees at this meeting, the conflict or appearance of conflict should be identified at this time. Hearing none, we will proceed. Next item on our agenda is the approval of the consent agenda. Having already read the materials listed under the consent agenda, is there any item that needs to be moved to a discussion portion of either the open or closed session? And we have on the consent agenda the minutes of the May 21st meeting and the minutes of the June 17th special meeting. Any items anybody wants to remove? If not, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
A motion by Trustee Davis, and again, if you identify yourself as you're making motions, just for the record, it'd be helpful. Thank you. Is there a second?
Trustee Cochran seconds.
Cochran, second. Further discussion? If not, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry. Sorry, forgive me. I'll do this probably second time. We have to call the roll on every item.
Okay, Ms. Artis Neal, aye. Mr. Bullock? Mr. Brown? Aye. Mr. Kobe? Aye. Mr. Cochran?
Aye.
Mr. Davis?
Aye.
Mr. Duckett?
Yes.
Mrs. Hopkins? Mr. McCullen?
Aye.
Mr. Meekins?
Yes.
Mr. Mosley? Mr. Pryor?
Yes.
And Mr. Stevens?
Yes. I now need to read to the board, for the record, the annual governing board certification from the Atlantic Coast Conference as required. As chair of the governing board of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, I attest, one, that responsibility for the administration of the athletics program has been delegated to the Chancellor of the institution. The Chancellor has the mandate and support of the board to operate a program of integrity in full compliance with NCAA, conference, and all other relevant rules and regulations. And third, the Chancellor, in consultation with the faculty athletics representative and the athletics director, will determine how the institutional vote shall be cast on issues of athletic policy presented to the NCAA and the conference, presented to the governing board on July 16, 2020. That's for the record. I now want to begin our meeting by congratulating Peter Hans as the new president of the UNC system. Peter is no stranger to higher education, having served as president of the North Carolina Community College System since May of 2018, and previously serving on the UNC Board of Governors for 6 years, including service as chair of that board. As we face rapid changes across our state, and in higher education in particular, Peter is clearly the right person for this job. He will assume the job on August 1st, and we look forward to working with him. As interim president, Dr. Bill Roper has been an incredible leader for the UNC system. In the midst of leadership transitions, difficult challenges, and a global pandemic, he has guided our 17 system schools with wisdom and dedication and resolve. We're grateful for his service. We have here today with us our new liaison from the UNC Board of Governors, Governor David Powers. We look forward to working with you, Governor, and to your whole board in our mission together in service to our state. Let me recognize now Governor Powers for some remarks. Excuse me, but.
Sorry, forgot that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very happy to be here with you today. Haywood and Allie Ray, hello on Zoom. Wish you were here with us. Really looking forward to a good year ahead. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be busy. We're going to have to be nimble and we're going to have to be creative as we work our way through the issues that are going to come at us. But I feel like, I've sat through more Zoom calls and conference calls and just one-on-one telephone conversations with other board members to realize that we've got an awful lot of talent around our state and around our system engaged in trying to make sure that we're able to deliver the kind of education, quality, and value that we have to students in North Carolina for the life of the university. We are as prepared as you can be. And we've been very fortunate to have former head of the CDC as our leader through this trying time. And he is turning over to our new president, Peter Hans, a very highly functioning system right now with all things considered. We're meeting next week, as you know, and it will be our first in-person meeting. Other than the meeting we had to actually elect Peter as president, it'll be our first in-person full meeting since the pandemic hit. We will be looking at a lot of things. We're going to get started. I chair the governance committee. We're going to get started on trustee selection probably in the fall. So we'll be meeting Chancellor and Mr. Chairman. We'll be meeting with y'all quite a bit to discuss that issue. You're going to have 3 open slates, 3 open spots on your governance committees. So we've got a lot of work ahead of us on that and look forward to working with you. And then I'm here to serve as a resource for you in your dealings with the system. I know it's not always easy, and your dealings with the Board of Governors are not always easy. But we have been able to work together over the years, and I expect to continue that very well. I've had pleasure of knowing many of you pretty well. I've appointed a good bit of you as my stint has gone. So I've been involved in you. I'm really looking forward to working with you. I have been for almost every school in the system. My tenure on the board. So Chapel Hill and Central and UNC-Asheville until today being the only 3 that I have not had that pleasure. So I'm very much looking forward to the chance to work with you. Be over here when you need me. I won't, I don't run universities, don't have any hope of running universities. That's too much work. I've seen what you guys do. So I will keep my place at the policy level and be there to serve you guys and help you through with any issues you may have with the system. And if you don't have my contact information, please let me know. I'll give you a card. Any of you feel free to call me at any time. And we'll get through what's going to be a very challenging year together. And just like I say, feel free to call me and talk anytime. Chairman and I have talked, had several good long conversations. I'll also be serving as liaison to UNC Healthcare, along with Chairman Ramsey. Will be working with me on that. So as issues come up around that, please don't hesitate to call. And hopefully we'll even get to do something fun, like go to a football game or basketball game or something before this is all over. So that's all I've got, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Governor Powers, and thank you for being with us and for your leadership on the Board of Governors. I think I'm right about this. You've spoken at every campus so far except this one, and we had several of those scheduled that had to be canceled, so we're all hopeful there'll be an opportunity for you. Thank you. We look forward to it. Members of the board, I'm struck by how different this meeting is compared to our normal meeting of the Board of Trustees. Of course, typically we'd be at the Carolina Inn and we'd be discussing goals and plans and priorities for the fall semester. This year, this upcoming semester, and this meeting are just not typical. We're in the midst of one of the most critical times in the history of our university. The Chancellor and his leadership team have worked around the clock, I mean that literally, to prepare for the challenges ahead. Chancellor, we as a board commend your efforts to lead this community through such difficult times. I mean that very sincerely. You and your leadership have balanced competing objectives and priorities to build a roadmap that's focused, flexible, and organized around our goals of educating our students, conducting life-changing research, and serving our state. As a board, we look forward to the discussions today for the best way to ensure the safety of our community in the months ahead. Again, thank you for all you and your team are doing. At our last special meeting, we voted to lift the moratorium on renaming campus buildings and public spaces. Our Board of Trustees is dedicated to reconciling our university's history with a deeper commitment to racial equality and inclusiveness. And we welcome conversation with our university community and beyond on how to do this. Today, we're taking another step in this process by reviewing and hopefully adopting a proposed policy for how to consider changing names to buildings and spaces at the university. I urge us to have in place a policy process that would ensure that each decision is taken with thoughtfulness, fairness, and a commitment to ensuring that the names on our campus reflect the highest ideals of our university. I look forward to our discussions later in the meeting. I just want to end with a special thanks to the staff who helped make this unique meeting possible. With both being in person and remote, the meeting was not easy to coordinate, and we appreciate very much your efforts. And now I want to welcome for the first time live at one of our meetings, although he's been with us a while, Reeves Mosley, our student body president. I'll turn it over to him for his remarks. Trustee Mosley.
Thank you for that, Chair Stevens. Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be able to see your faces in person, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to update you on what the undergraduate and graduate student governments are currently working on and will continue to work on as we move into the upcoming academic year. Although current circumstances across the country have created unrest among the general public and for many in our UNC population, I'm confident that the necessary changes can be made to ensure the comfort and inclusion of everyone in the Carolina community. Undergraduate student government has begun working on multiple projects that will improve student life on campus, while simultaneously increasing student involvement and engagement across a variety of platforms and initiatives. First, the undergraduate executive branch is working to promote mental health advocacy through a cross-collaboration initiative with NC State University. This initiative will equip student leaders to directly provide mental health support in their own communities. Additionally, we have begun work on Constellations, a gender-based violence prevention initiative which will aim to shift the narrative surrounding this issue from response to prevention. Along with these actions, undergraduate student government has successfully created a task force to provide student input for the data science school. Moreover, we are continuing to promote the Senate's newly established Commission for Campus Equality and Student Equity, which is tasked with regulating, producing, and enforcing actionable policy centered around equal rights, anti-racism, and racial justice on campus. We have also started the process of access to on-campus parking and hardship parking for our students. The Affordability Committee is also preparing to launch the Carolina Immersion Fund to help students pay for extracurricular activities. The fund currently has $5,000 through the Parents' Council and a match from the Provost. And finally, the undergraduate student government has been working hard to emphasize civic engagement mobilization efforts for the upcoming 2020 elections. The Graduate and Professional Student Federation has also been extremely productive during the months that students have been away from campus. On April 17th, the Executive Committee released a statement in support of University Library's decision to terminate its contract with Elsevier, which provides subscriptions to thousands of scholarly journals due to the company's unsustainable increases in prices. UNC will now subscribe to a smaller set of essential titles and promote open access resources to students. The GPSF has also engaged the graduate school and the office of the provost in initial conversations about raising graduate student stipends and promoting parity among disciplines. Additionally, the GPSF's Town and Local Relations Committee has initiated dialogue with local leaders in Chapel Hill, Carrboro, and Durham. They recently held a meeting with Orange County Board of Commissioners Chair Penny Rich, to discuss opportunities for graduate student involvement in the community, as well as the impact of the university's reopening on local communities. On July 7th, the GPSF held an emergency meeting of the Senate and passed 3 resolutions. Resolutions 51-001 endorses grad worker responses to the roadmap, 51-002 recognizes and supports staff solidarity, and 51-003 supports international and undocumented graduate and professional students. Along with this emergency meeting, the GPSF summer government has been trying to work with the Board of Elections to adjust the GPSF Senate's annual session to accommodate the early start and abbreviated academic calendar. Despite this work, the GPSF is concerned about the access to financial aid and funding that students will have for the upcoming year. There has been mixed messaging about what qualifies a graduate student for aid that has created uncertainty going into the new academic year. And finally, I want to close by bringing up an issue that has been heavily weighing on many members of the Carolina community recently. Recent events have brought light to the desire to rename many buildings on campus. There are many considerations to make regarding this issue and some suggestions to consider that have been extended by Carolina students, faculty, and alumni. While this is obviously not an easy task or decision to make, it could be made easier by prioritizing the naming of buildings that have been suggested by the Commission on Race, History, and a Way Forward. The process of renaming buildings can encompass a broad section of the Carolina community spearheaded by those who have been advocating for change for years. In these efforts, we must balance the need to carefully consider changes with the urgency and momentum of the current moment. As a unit, the board promotes excellence in every facet that we can. Every UNC student should feel welcome and as though they have a place on this campus. We cannot change history, but we can make changes now that foster an environment on this campus that allows for diversity, inclusion, and success at every turn, because that is what will allow our students, faculty, and community to thrive. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Trustee Mosley. Now I'd call on the Chancellor for remarks and updates for us. Chancellor?
Great. Thank you, Chair Stevens, and congratulations on your reelection as board chair. I also want to thank you for the incredible partnership that I think we have developed over the past year. During these past 5 months, it's been the rare occasion where Richard and I haven't spoken on a given day, and I appreciate the guidance you've provided me as we've been working through these challenges. I want to also thank all of the board for always answering my call. I've called on occasion just to check in and seek your counsel, other times just to let me know what you're hearing around the state, and it's meant a lot. And I want to also welcome Governor Powers. Looking forward to working closely with you. You look great in Carolina blue, and we look forward to a strong partnership. But I just really am grateful for the support of everyone. I also want to say that it's great to be back in the same room together again, and I hope that we can again work through the challenges ahead so that we can be together on a regular basis for our meetings. I want to also echo Chair Stevens' congratulations to our new president, Peter Hans. I've already had a number of conversations with President-elect Hans, and I think he's going to do a great job in leading the UNC system. I also want to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Bill Roper. Bill, as you know, has done an incredible job over these past 18 months. Many challenging issues. Probably not a better person, as Dave Powers has said, to be leading us during this pandemic. Bill's done an incredible job. I think he's led with integrity, with inclusivity, and with vision during these challenging times. And I'm grateful for the confidence that he's shown in me and others here on our leadership team. And I look forward to seeing Bill and Mary Ann back on our campus whenever they're ready. I also want to take the opportunity to congratulate Mimi Chapman on her election as chair of the faculty, and Shana Hill with her re-election as head of the employee forum. I really have enjoyed working with Shana for the past few years, and with Mimi over the past few months. She's taken this job at an incredibly challenging time, but I think she'll do a wonderful job. She and I were on the phone last night for nearly an hour working through some issues, and I think she's going to do a great job. And so I think we'll be hearing from her later today. So I really want to talk today about, focus my comments on 3 areas. First, the policy for renaming buildings and spaces on our campus, the roadmap for planning for the fall 2020, and progress that we've made on Carolina Next. And I want to emphasize that our this great university has has never closed down during this pandemic. We have kept many of our university operations open. I've said repeatedly that our employees have shown up daily, whether they're working remotely or here on campus working in person. They have really risen to the occasion, and for that we are grateful. I want to just again thank the board for lifting the moratorium and allowing the History, Race, and Way Forward Commission to do its important work of helping us to learn from our past and make Carolina a more welcoming place for everyone. I think that was an important step last month, and today I'm grateful that the university has taken another step forward and discussing a policy for renaming buildings and spaces on our campus. Establishing a renaming policy will enable us to thoughtfully review recommendations and ensure that the people we honor on our campus reflect our values today. I know the board is aware that I have received from the History, Race, and Way Forward Commission a recommendation for consideration. Once we have guidelines in place, the commission recommended to me that the removal of the names Aycock, Carr, Daniels, and Ruffin from buildings on our campus. And the recommendations are the culmination of a lot of hard work, not just by this commission, but by several of you here on this board going back to 2015. And I know that many of you worked really hard on that during that period. And so for that, we're grateful, and I think we're well positioned to be able to make sound decisions to move the university forward. So I look forward to the discussion today regarding the policy, which will allow us to make the necessary changes and to move our university forward and to refocus our attention on the mission of the university. And that's really important. We have an incredible roadmap for not just this fall, but a roadmap for the future of Carolina and Carolina Next. And I'll say a few things about that in a minute. Second, though, I do want to provide an update on our roadmap planning for the fall. The situation in North Carolina is somewhat concerning, and the positive cases across our state are not what we had hoped for at this point of the summer. We are in constant communication with our state and local officials along with the UNC system. I just was on an hour-long call with the other system chancellors and President Roper and Chair Ramsey and President-elect Peter Hans, and I think we're working toward progress and trying to really work to do the right thing for all the system schools and for our students, faculty, staff, as we try to ramp up our on-campus operations. Despite the challenges we face, I couldn't be happier with the team that we have in place here. We do remain hopeful that we've been working tirelessly around the clock. I want to thank Bob Bluen, who is back here. Bob has been leading the roadmap implementation team, and they meet daily for at least an hour and a half, if not longer, every day, including on some occasions on weekends. And I just can't thank them enough. I also want to just take the opportunity to thank our infectious disease and public health faculty experts. We couldn't be better positioned than we are here in Chapel Hill with this team. Mike Cohen, Billy Fisher, Allison Aiello, Audrey Pettifor, David Weber, Erica Pettigrew, Ralph Barrick, Joe Enron, and I'm probably missing a few, but we are on calls with them 2 or 3 times a week. And there's probably not another university in the country that has that level of talent that's there at the table with us through the decision-making process. And so for them, we are grateful. But we're depending on their continued guidance and expertise as we move forward. And we are spending a lot of time talking about off-ramps. We said from the beginning when we launched that roadmap in late May that we'd have to think about what off-ramps might be necessary if the situation presented where we felt it was not safe to open certain parts of campus. And so we're asking 4 critical questions as we look at the roadmap. Off-ramps. The first is, has the community embraced and adhered to the community standards that we have set? And we'll be monitoring this closely. Are the public health and hospital systems in any way becoming overrun? We're going to have ways in which we can measure that, and we've been working closely with UNC Healthcare. I can't thank Wesley Burks and his team enough for partnering with us because this is an important part of the equation. Are UNC Health, Campus Health, and Occupational Health able to sustain testing and tracing programs? And this is something I will say that over the past 10 days, 2 weeks, we've been monitoring closely, and we are worried that we have to be sure that we have the supply chain necessary to be able to test should there be an outbreak on campus. And so we're working closely on this, and with UNC Healthcare's involvement, we're optimistic that we'll be better positioned than we are right now to manage this as we start to bring people back onto campus, living in residence halls, et cetera. And then the last question we're asking is, are critical functions for on-campus operations able to continue? And this is an important factor as we would think about potential off-ramps. We are just about finished with an attestation document that will require community members to acknowledge that they have read and understand the standards and that they agree to adhere to them if they're going to come back and be part of our on-campus learning, teaching, and research environment. And this is going to be really important. We'll continue to meet with faculty, students, and staff to discuss adherence to community standards and more over the next few weeks. But as you well know, August 10th is the scheduled first day of classes, and that's arriving quickly. I just want to say something about our international students who have experienced additional stress over the past 10 days or so, given the federal guidance that would have prevented them from remaining in the U.S. If they were only taking classes remotely. And fortunately, on Tuesday, that earlier federal guidance was rescinded. I think we're in a better place today because of that. But our international students, both graduate and undergraduate, play an integral role in our mission of teaching, research, and service at Carolina, and we're supporting them every day, and we will continue to be by their side during this. And the Carolina Way program that we announced in late May, which can take up to 1,000 students to study entirely online, is growing in interest. We have, I think now close to 650 students who have signed up for Carolina Way, and many of these are our international students who won't be able to get to Chapel Hill this fall. So we'll continue working alongside them during these uncertain times. We will continue also updating our carolinatogether.unc.edu website. This is the roadmap for fall 2020, and it's updated weekly, typically on Thursdays or Fridays by the implementation team. So finally, I just want to say a few things about how we have moved forward during these challenging times. And Carolina Next Innovations for Public Good, which this board endorsed back in, it was January the 30th. We have moved forward on several initiatives during these trying times. The first of those, the Build Our Community Together initiative, being led by Amy Locklear-Hertel and Sibby Anderson-Tompkins. They have been working very closely with their team in moving forward several initiatives. As Bob and Sibby and I messaged to our campus on June 11th, we still have a lot of work to do on our campus surrounding issues of racial tension and racial disparities, but I think we have a great plan in place. I'm pledging to make sure that this is a priority for our campus leadership. We'll be discussing this in our early August senior leadership retreat, as we did last year, and talk about the progress that we've made. But I expect each of our deans and senior leaders to ensure that their schools, their units, their departments are making progress and moving forward in this regard. Last week, Bob and I announced an initiative that provides career development opportunities, professional networking, and more for tenure-track underrepresented faculty, and I'm excited to see that program launched. And Sibby, and serving in her role as Chief Diversity Officer, established a new Diversity Council a few months ago, and we are working alongside them to be sure that we're addressing the right issues, using the best approaches. And as I've already said, Sibby and Amy have really led that Build Our Community Together initiative. They presented to the Faculty Executive Committee their early work, and they'll be working in coordination with the faculty who developed the Racial Equity Roadmap last month. And so that presentation to FEC this past Monday by Sibby and Amy, I know, was well received. So we're finally making great progress on Initiative 4, which is Discover. Pleased to announce that we've secured over $1 billion in new research grants, the first time that we've ever topped $1 billion in new research grants, and that will result in probably upwards of $1.4 billion in expenditures for this upcoming year. So that's incredible. I will probably move up in the rankings, and something we should be really proud of. I know that a lot of this comes from the work of our infectious disease public health researchers with their work around COVID-19, but I just want to emphasize that we have a very robust research program at Carolina that crosses every school at this university, and much of the, that $1 billion in new research grants extends beyond just our health affairs and medical researchers, and so we're grateful for that. I want to also just say thank you to the North Carolina General Assembly for their support of renovations to the School of Nursing and to an expansion of Keenan Flagler Business School. You probably read this recently and enjoyed spending some time with Speaker Moore over at Carrington Hall, and I think he brought a delegation over. It's been probably a month ago, and I think that was really important. And that funding to help us get those renovations done. The School of Nursing is moving up in the rankings, and the Keenan Flagler Business School, as you well know, we have to turn away a lot of undergraduates who want to study business, and we just don't have room. And so the funding that the General Assembly provided recently will allow us to meet the needs of the state of North Carolina. So I'm grateful for their support. Also on June 15th, we announced a new partnership with the UNC School of Law and the North Carolina Central University to support military veterans in our state. And this is really important. We're trying to find more ways, as I've committed to the Board of Governors, in ways that we can partner with our system schools. And this is a great opportunity to ensure that our veterans have proper legal representation. And I'm looking forward to that partnership with North Carolina Central. So, these are just a few examples of the ways that our universities continue to live out its mission of service to the state. And this is really what great universities do. During these times of crisis, if you want to call them, this great universities lead. And we are doing that. We're teaching society to adapt to these challenges and how to be prepared for the next grand challenge, whatever. Proud of the work that our faculty, staff, and students are doing. And I again just want to thank you all for being here. I know I was a little long today, but there's a lot going on, and I want you to know that we're carrying on the important work of the university. So I'm going to turn it back to Richard. Thank you.
Thank you again, Chancellor, for what you and your team are doing. Any comments, questions for the Chancellor? Any things he discussed? We'll have some opportunities later in the meeting to discuss with him. Trustee Bolick. Microphone.
Thank you, Chancellor Guskiewicz. Just wanted to ask a follow-up question on the roadmap to the fall, and maybe Provost Bluen could sort of lend some additional sort of information on this, and that is the sort of the allotment or percentage of classes that we expect to be in person versus online, and what your current view on that is, and what that's projected to look like at this point.
I'll start and then pass it to Bob, but I'll just say that as I announced last week, I think it was on Thursday or Friday, at that point we had 57% of our courses were going to, scheduled to be taught in person. But the total number of seats is less than that, because the large lecture classes, those that typically have 150 to 200 students in them, just can't be taught with the spatial distancing. So because of that, there's an offset, and so we're going to see fewer percentage of overall seats taught. And we don't know, we're monitoring this closely with the governor's announcement just the other day, and with K-12 schools looking as if there's going to be some challenges with more homeschooling. We don't know what that's going to result in for employees here, including faculty, but we're monitoring that closely. Bob, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so Kevin's absolutely right. The number's right around 57%. That number can toggle up or down depending upon how things evolve. We are monitoring this daily. but we're very pleased that our faculty have stepped up and have agreed to come to class. There's a little bit of variability from school to school, as you might expect, depending upon the characteristics of that school and the size of their respective classes.
Thank you all, and thank you again, Chancellor. Let's now turn our attention, ladies and gentlemen, to the proposed policy on consideration of removal of names of university buildings and public spaces. Following our special meeting in June, the draft was circulated. I asked Trustees Davis and Artis Neal and Bolick and Brown if they would provide some input to the Chancellor individually on their thoughts about that draft. I know others of you have thought about and seen the draft now for a couple of weeks and have thoughts about it. And I'd like to now recognize Trustee Davis to talk to us about the policy and discuss the current draft. And I believe we have to put this up, we have to post this online. Is that correct, Clayton or TJ? All right, let's wait just a moment until that's posted.
Thank you, Chairman. You asked Trustees Bolick, Brown, and Artis Neal and me to work with the Chancellor to draft a proposed policy for the consideration of the removal of names on university buildings and public spaces. Working collaboratively, along with the Chancellor and the Chancellor's Chief of Staff, we crafted a proposed policy that was shared with all trustees for their review. It is my understanding that after that review, we will be entertaining several amendments to the proposed policy today. I would like to thank the trustees who worked so diligently on drafting this policy, the Chancellor, the Chancellor's Chief of Staff, the General Counsel, the Chair, and all of the trustees for their considerable time devoted to this important effort. I would now like to review the policy. I believe the preamble really sets the tone and is the most important part. So I would like to read a portion of it. The names that our university attaches to buildings and public spaces make a statement about the values we wish to lift up for emulation and pass on to successive generations. As the nation's first public institution of higher education, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has a responsibility to promote equal opportunity and equal access for all. To that end, we must endeavor to shape a student body, staff, and professorate, curriculum, and agenda for research, artistic creativity, and civic engagement that reflects and honors the full, rich diversity of human experience and thought. We hold fast to our convictions, and we trust that constantly striving to be a more just, tolerant, and equitable institution makes us a stronger university and positions us to build a better future for the people of North Carolina, the nation, and the world. In order to be a place where inclusive transformation is valued, we must be willing to submit our history and traditions to scrutiny and thoughtful assessment consistent with the high standards of integrity and free and open inquiry and debate. Upholding our values includes an openness to changing or otherwise contextualizing names that were attached to campus buildings or public spaces by prior stewards of the university, whose values may, in contemporary circumstances, undercut Carolina's mission, which is to serve as a center for research, scholarship, and creativity, and to teach a diverse community of undergraduate, graduate, and professional students to become the next generation of leaders. So the process that we then are proposing as a part of this policy would be that anyone could come forward with a written request to the Chancellor requesting the removal of a name from a building or space on campus. Within that request, we are requesting or requiring that there would be mention of the specific conduct by the namesake of the campus building or public space that jeopardizes the university's integrity, mission, or values, and goes over other things that are required to be set forth in a written report to the Chancellor. The Chancellor will then review that written report and based upon the strength of the scholarly historical evidence and the principles that we outline in Section 3 of the policy, the Chancellor will decide whether or not to submit to the Board of Trustees a formal request for removal. In Section 3, we set forth the principles for evaluating a written request for removal. So in other words, this is what the committee should consider. In that, we state the things that would make a case stronger and the things that would make a case weaker. And we are very clear about what those things are. Finally, we provide an opportunity for contextualization, education, and preservation of historical knowledge to advance the university's mission and values, and state that it must be considered in any final determination on the potential removal and or renaming of a university building or public space. So, if I might, Chair, before I make my motion, our first university seal, established in 1791, included the head of Apollo in the center of a rising sun, with rays of light going forth in all directions, which symbolized the dawn of higher education in our state. The University of the People as a place which shines a bright light, the enlightening beams of the rising sun to make ever better our state, our nation, and our world. When we changed our seal, the one aspect that we made certain that we retained was light. Inscribed on that new seal, adopted in 1896, are the words Lux and Libertas. Lux, light. The ever-present view of our university as a light on the hill. We have what I view as a sacred responsibility to always be a light. In this moment of the history of our university, our state, and our nation, I believe that we are called to be a light that shines in the dark corners in which racism has festered for far too long. To not simply make a change, but rather to establish a process for change that is firmly rooted in our educational mission, a process for change that provides opportunities for not just changed names, but changed hearts. When done correctly, the light that we shine forth through the policy that we adopt and the processes that will then follow will expose and condemn racism and other forms of hate, will educate so we may all learn from the past such that it is never repeated, and will play a role, and I believe an important role, in the healing of our state and our nation. So, if we adopt this policy today, I would respectfully ask the Chancellor to immediately implement the policy, begin receiving written requests in accordance therewith, form a committee for consideration of those requests, and report back to the Board of Trustees with any formal requests to rename. I am confident, Chancellor, that this board would call an emergency meeting to consider and act on those recommendations. With that, Chair Stevens, I move adoption of the Board of Trustees policy for the consideration of the removal of names on university buildings and public spaces.
You heard the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Trustee Artis Neal seconds. Now for discussion. And I know that several of you had suggested amendments, and I think it's appropriate now that we talk about those. Let me start with Trustee Meekins. You had suggested several specific changes. If you could outline your suggestions there, and perhaps the maker and seconder of the motion would accept those as friendly amendments as we go along.
Thank you, Richard. I do have some suggestions. First of all, before I even make these suggestions, let me say what a great job those of you who worked on this did in coming up with this policy and this criteria. And so my suggestions are merely that. Some of them are just, I feel strongly about, but just a different maybe way of looking at some of these issues. The first one, I guess the question is whether or not when the Chancellor reviews these requests, whether we want him to make a decision affirmatively that he feels like the action needs to be taken and then gives it to us for review, or whether or not he is merely looking at the requests and trying to determine whether they have merit before he gives them to us. So the one change that I would suggest, and that's going to be up to the board as to how you want that to look, or how you want that to read. But if you want the Chancellor to make the determination that there's merit and send it to us for a decision, then there's one change that I think that would need to be made that makes it more clear, and that under section 1 process, in the paragraph that begins, the Chancellor will review, I put in here that I believe a better word to use instead of act on would be consider, because act on the matter and make a decision. We won't.
And the maker and the second accept that.
Yes.
We accept that as a friendly amendment. If you would consider anything further, Trustee Meekins.
I have a few more, so bear with me. I'm sorry. In the section under 3 principles, I do not believe that it should be listed with the other criteria as a factor which standing alone makes the request stronger.
Oh, agreed.
Agreed by the seconder and the maker. And then I assume by that, Trustee Meekins, you would delete the last bullet under. Correct. Okay. That's agreed to by the maker and the seconder.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Continue on.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clayton behind you.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, just a point of clarification. So I'm going to be typing in real time these revisions. So it'd be very helpful if you could tell me exactly where you are. And then if you look on the screen, we're broadcasting the revisions on YouTube. So we're going to incorporate all of your revisions in red line form on what you see on the screen. People that are viewing remotely can watch us do this as well. Once we're done with all the revisions, we will then take the document and post it on the BOT website. But what's helpful to me is I'll be a scribe in real time typing these. So if you could give me more direction about this line, type in this, and then make sure, if you will, that I have typed exactly what you've asked me to type. So thank you.
I'll do my best.
Thank you. Do you have the first two, Clayton, or do you need to go back over those?
I only have the very first one I need about consider. I needed this new one. I need him to help me with that one.
Okay, if you would, Clayton, then, as I understand it, Trustee Meekins, your
Yeah, if you go to
suggestion.
under principles,
You've added a new sentence right after the written request, right in there, a new sentence which reads, written request for removing a name are more compelling when the scholarly historical evidence is clear and convincing, and when they satisfy one or more of the following criteria. Is that, did I get it?
that's right.
Clayton, at the last bullet under that section, you would delete the scholarly historical evidence is strong and clear. We delete that.
And then Clayton, underneath that, the third item that I would suggest as far as changing is under the weaker section, I don't believe that the last element, evidence above about the namesake's behavior or views is scant, inconclusive, or ambiguous is necessary. If you're going to include the element, I definitely do not believe that the word inconclusive should be used, because if the only evidence of wrongdoing is inconclusive, I don't believe that the request should be brought to the Board of Trustees to begin with.
So your suggestion is delete the word inclusive?
I believe, Ralph, you were saying, Trustee Meekins, you were saying to delete, you would prefer to delete the entire sentence, but if we elected not to delete the entire sentence, then to delete the word inconclusive.
That's correct.
I'm happy to accept it as a friendly amendment to delete the entire sentence. I think that it's inherent within the remaining part of the document. Trustee Artis Neal.
I'm fine with that.
Ms. Neal agrees, so that's another friendly amendment. Ralph, you're on a roll. Keep going.
Just a few more. Under the section, I believe also under the weaker section, it talks about evidence of some type of remonstration or change of behavior. If I can find where.
But the second bullet that now reads, despite the evidence, you would propose, despite significant evidence. Your suggestion then is to add the word significant.
That's fine with me.
Agreed to by the maker and the seconder. Trustee Meekins, any others?
Two other changes. If we go back underneath Roman numeral 3, principles for evaluating a written request for removal. Starts with the paragraph, the university must assure. It says the namesake was alleged or found to have committed a serious violation. I don't like major decisions being made upon simple allegations, so I would suggest removing the word alleged.
You now read, the namesake was found to have committed.
That would be my suggestion.
Agreed.
Agreed to? Okay?
My last one, the next bullet point, it says the conduct in question was central. I would just suggest we put in there the repugnant conduct, just for clarification.
Microphone, Davis,
Chair, I'll accept that as a friendly amendment.
Agreed.
same with the seconder. Okay?
That's it.
Thank you. Thank you for your thoroughness. I'm sorry. Trustee Duckett, you had suggested perhaps removing the last paragraph and that it sets up sort of an appeal process. Well, that's inherent. The Chancellor can always come back to us at a different time. So I understand your suggestion is to remove that paragraph. Is that correct?
It is, Mr. Chair. I just feel like we have the option of doing exactly that without it being a necessary written part of this document.
Agreed.
Have acceptance from the maker and the seconder of the motion. That will be included as a friendly amendment, deletion of the last paragraph.
Again, Mr. Assistant Secretary, that would be to delete the last paragraph.
This paragraph here?
Yes, sir, delete that paragraph in toto.
Okay. Are there others?
Mr. Chairman.
Trustee Bullock.
Despite the taking out of my last paragraph that I wrote, I do have two amendments I would like to propose. Mr. University Secretary, if you would go to the paragraph that deals with the Chancellor moving forward, it is in the process, would be after Roman numeral 2, process for submitting a written request for removal. Let me just make sure I may not be right. I think I've got to go down further than that.
Right after the bullets.
Where is that at, Mr. Vice Chairman? Here it is. Right after the bullet in that, the sentence that begins at the Chancellor's discretion. It also says, as that sentence continues, will refer a written request for removal of a name to a committee appointed by the Chancellor. After the word Chancellor, I would propose an amendment which states, after to a committee appointed by the Chancellor, comma, which shall include members of the Board of Trustees, alumni of the university, faculty, and staff of the university,
And
comma.
And students.
And yeah, I'm getting to that. And student representation, comma, to investigate.
Trustee Davis?
I accept that as a friendly amendment.
Agreed.
Accepted by the maker and the seconder. Thank you, Trustee Bullock.
And Mr. Chairman, I have one more,
Yes,
if
sir.
I may.
Please.
If I may, in order, and I'll wait for
Wait for Clayton.
Mr. Summers to. Good. Nice touch. Have one more amendment, and this should be at the end of the document. Where is that at? It is end of the sentence that comprises second to last paragraph of the policy. So it's second to last, where we talk about opportunities for contextualization, education, and preservation of historical knowledge. That sentence, And let me just interject here. This amendment comes through a lot of additional, what I would describe as hard work and conversation with stakeholders in the university community. I know myself and other trustees have reached out to many people who have held high elected offices in the state of North Carolina, who are graduates of this university, who have worked and continue to work at the university. And there is what I believe to be a strong consensus to add this amendment, which would state that I would propose that it state those opportunities shall include, but may not be limited to, a plaque that states the former name of the building or public space and provides the history in a way that educates.
Okay, let's let Secretary Summers type that in before we.
Yeah. I've got that written if you.
Chair, I will accept that as a friendly amendment.
Okay, we have it accepted by the maker and the seconder, but let's get it up there for anybody else to see.
Can you please repeat that, Mr. Bullock?
Yes, sir. Those opportunities shall include, but may not be limited to, a plaque that states the former name of the building or public space and provides the history in a way that educates. And I do want to reiterate.
Read that last clause again, Trustee Bullock.
Yeah, with all due respect to Ms. Exia Woods at Reidsville Senior High School back in 1986, if you can give me a little more help on typing it, I would appreciate it, and so would Mrs. Woods. Thank you.
Yeah. Building or public and provides the history in a way that educates. And I would, if we could edit and say, instead of provides, say illustrate instead of the word provides, or illustrates.
Chair, I will accept that as a friendly amendment.
Okay, we have acceptance by the maker and the seconder.
And can I say one comment on that amendment?
Yes,
and
sir.
I just wanted to reiterate that amendment is in no means an attempt to, if there's a determination to rename a building, to keep a name on a building. I had a lot of input, and I know members of this board had a lot of input from people all over the issue who wanted to make sure that the actions taken. So, for example, if a building is renamed, there is evidence of a consensus from a governing group that there was actually a move forward and a change in direction at a point in time. And without some representation to that, we lose the history and the evolution of the university and its structures.
Good, thank you. Trustee Hopkins. Preston Holt.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would be opposed, or I'm opposed to adding that. I think that I would add caution if we decide to add that limits the future of where we're going. I would also say that I would prefer to keep it broad in contextualizing instead of limiting to a plaque. I'm sorry, I didn't have this prepared. So I think a large part of the issue is how do we look forward? And right there, we're preserving the past. So I would caution us if we add that. I understand the intention, and I want to support that. I think there are other ways through contextualization versus limiting that to a plaque or mandating that has a plaque on that building. at this point in time. Perhaps that's something.
Trustee Duckett?
I actually appreciate and respect both sides of that. I would say with Carolina Hall, it's a great example of using contextualization and understanding the resolutions from 2015 from the Board of Trustees, which were very sincere about educating, contextualizing, and curating the entire university. And I would say if we failed in doing that in a timely basis. Now, Saunders Hall becoming Carolina's Hall was contextualized and well done. I'm just curious, in this room, how many people have been through there and seen the contextualization in Saunders Hall? So it becomes important that the contextualization and curation, I think, can get to that, whether the plaque's indoors, outdoors, and things like that. I don't think we can determine all of that, but I would encourage that the full story be told, because that's the whole reason we exist, in some fashion. It doesn't have to be a plaque or whatever, and I think Saunders Hall becoming Carolina Hall is well done because it covers 3 areas, not 1. The original history of Saunders, the original history of why we renamed, but also importantly, the Jim Crow era. And I think it was well done. So I'm not going to get lost in that point, but I think the key word up there is opportunities for contextualization, education, and preservation. Cover that. If the university in the future, and I won't be here, probably is doing their job. So it can go either way with me, but all I'm saying is I don't want to lose the history. That's my most important point here.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask clarification?
Yes, ma'am.
Trustee Hopkins, just for clarification, is your concern where the information is placed as opposed to there being information about previous parties that were named? Is that your concern, that it's on the building, or just that it be somewhere in the university? I'm a little bit just confused.
So wanting to move forward and have the agility to move forward, limiting us to a plaque or requiring a plaque can be constraining and viewed as preserving the past in a way that maybe is different than the future holds.
Other, Trustee Davis, microphone.
Thank you, Chair. I might propose an amendment that balances those for consideration if approved by Ms. Artis Neal and others. So that would be those opportunities shall include, and then strike, but may not be limited to. And then strike a plaque. And then add shall include contextualization within the building or space that includes the former name of the building. But that way, it's not just, it provides, contextualization could be anywhere within the building, right? So that way, I think we want contextualization so that we can educate, but you're not wanting to sort of say that it would have to be a plaque. Is that?
Trustee Hopkins?
I'm sorry to stay on this point. I understand what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep the historic contextualization in its location. I'm just not sure that the future of every building is going to have contextualization in it, or is that a museum? What does that become in the future? I have no clue. That is up to somebody else. But what I'm concerned that keeping the haze of something that was determined to be repulsive, too much in that space can be a form of racism.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Bullock?
I'll move to remove that amendment. Is it clear maybe that in the original resolutions that had the moratorium, number one in that group of resolutions, Trustee Hopkins, I believe, addressed the contextualization issue? Is that correct?
That is correct, Trustee Bullock.
So theoretically, or really actually, that idea could be proposed or utilized in the appropriate circumstance already, and so we already have that in place in terms of policy. Is that right or wrong?
And I hope it is, yes.
I just wanted everybody to know that I did have a lot of input on making sure there was an acknowledgement of a point in time where in 2020 and in this age, because we're talking about things that are going to hopefully survive for many centuries to come, that there was a tipping point or a turning point where there was action taken.
So Trustee Bullock, you would delete your proposed amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Are there others?
Yes,
Trustee Artis Neal. Wait, ready. You know. Let's take a moment to get that up on the board. You see the motion, you have acceptance from
I'll
the,
accept that as a friendly amendment.
and I assume you accept your own motion. Okay.
Yes, I
Very
do.
good. Comments, questions on that amendment? Okay, others? Hearing none, let's now go to discussion of the motion as amended, which is what's before you. Trustee Brown.
We got to hold it.
You have to hold it the entire time.
That seems to be a glitch in the system, but I'll keep holding it. It's a good thing. I just want to simply say thank you to others who've made the comments. I think all of these changes are helpful and many of them are very important. I also think it's important that people recognize that we are doing this in a deliberate process. We are establishing a process. We're establishing guidelines for the process. And importantly, and I appreciate Trustee Davis, your comments earlier in reading the values that underpin the process. And those values of ensuring that we remain a university and are a university that provides opportunity and access to all. And some that I want to lift up that are very important, and that is values ensuring that we honor the rich diversity of human experience and thought. And all of this will take place under a framework that ensures that standards of freedom, and open inquiry and debate occur during the process. And I think those are the types of values that I think we can be proud of. And the fact that we are doing this in a a thoughtful and I believe a deliberate manner is another thing that we can be proud of as a board. And so I endorse this and thank you very much for the efforts of many great wordsmithers to add to this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Brown. Other discussion of the motion?
Mr. Chairman.
Trustee Bowley.
I want to echo what Trustee Brown said and Trustee Davis. I want to publicly thank Chief of Staff Amy Hertel with respect to her vigorous sort of helping in this effort, and Chancellor Guskowitz, who worked closely with the 4 members of this board that, Mr. Chairman, you appointed to get this process rolling. I do want to commend the board for the willingness to implement, as Trustee Brown said, a process and not simply taking board action in an ad hoc manner without some formal standards in place, because we are representing and working on behalf of a university that has been here for now more than 2 centuries and will continue, hopefully, to be here for centuries to come. And if we don't take deliberate processes in these decision makings, which are of importance not only to our students, faculty, and alumni, but to the nation with respect to the higher education mission that this university represents, I don't think we do those constituents a service by simply making decisions without the intellectual process of making sure our decisions stand on firm ground.
Thank you, Trustee Bowley. Other comments on discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we will call the roll on the motion as amended.
Okay. First, Ms. Artis Neal, yes. Mr. Bolick.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Kobe.
Yes.
Mr. Cochran.
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Mr. Duckett.
Yes.
Mrs. Hopkins. Mr. McCullen.
Yes.
Mr. Meekins.
Yes.
Mr. Mosley.
Yes.
Mr. Pryor.
No.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes. Motion carries 12-1. Thank you, members of the board, for that thorough discussion, all the work that came to this point. We've got more work to do. This is a second step in a long-range process for us, but thank you for doing this. Governor Powers, we don't normally draft things in session like that. It's a little bit unusual for us, but I think you can see this group works pretty well together and comes to consensus by working together. So,
Seemed to be a very robust process, and that's important.
Trustee Davis.
Yes, Chair. If there are any grammar errors in that, just as we were doing that quickly, I would like to just give authority for Assistant Secretary Summers to correct those. I don't believe there were, but if there were, or misspellings, if I could do that without objection.
Without objection? To order. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a break. I've got almost 12:30, 10 minutes sufficient. We'll come back at 12:40. We stand in recess.
Chair Stevens? This is Trustee Cochran, and I am back online. Thank you. Chair Stevens? This is Trustee Cochran, and I am back online and unmuted.
We're not back in yet, but they hear you.
Okay, thanks, Chuck.
Well, too talking. But the folks that like Haywood, I can hear me. Haywood, are you there?
I'm right here.
Good to hear you. Are you zooming too?
Yes, but I'm not, no picture involved in my Zoom,
Oh, you're just on the phone.
just on the phone.
Well,
I'm not ready for prime time yet, Allie Ray. I'm not quite there.
Yeah, well, but you sound good.
Thank you.
I was doing better than most of the folks I saw. My able assistant, we got a new Popeyes in town. She went and got me a
Ladies and
plate.
gentlemen, let's get started again.
Sorry, Allie Ray.
Members of the board, if you could take your seats, we're going to restart the meeting. Okay, on your cue, TJ. We're back in session following a recess. I'd now like to recognize Trustee Cochran for the Finance, Infrastructure, and Audit Committee.
Thank you, Chair Stevens. As is our custom, we turn it over at this point in time to the person who's done the work and does the presentations, and that is Jonathan Pruitt. Jonathan, if you would lead us through our portion of the agenda.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman Cochran, members of the board. Good afternoon. The first item is an annual requirement and the Board of Trustees of UNC-Chapel Hill, and it is to accept the transfer of funds from the endowment amount of fund transfer
And the endowment board has taken action already on the same item. Yes, sir.
Chairman.
Trustee Davis.
Gene Davis, Trustee Davis, move approval of the transfer to the University of the endowments distribution from the investment fund.
Okay, we can do that. I was going to do both.
Second.
Motion second. Further discussion on action item 1. If not, we'll call the roll.
Ms. Artis Neal, yes. Mr. Bullock,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Kobe,
Yes.
Mr. Cochran,
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Duckett,
Yes.
Ms. Hopkins, Mr. McCullen,
Yes.
Mr. Meekins,
Yes.
Mr. Mosley,
Yes.
Mr. Pryor,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Turn back to Mr. Pruitt for action item 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Second item. The first recommendation for a second 3-year term. The second recommendation is to elect Ann 3-year term.
You heard the suggestion, you heard the report. Do we have a motion from Trustee Cochran?
So move.
Second.
Second, Trustee Davis.
Second by Trustee Davis. Further discussion? If not,
Mr. Chairman,
sorry.
who is Ann Brennan? I apologize. I know Mr. Ellison.
Sure. Who would like to answer?
Dave, Ann Brennan is already on the UNC Investment Fund Board. She's a retired Goldman Sachs banker on the fixed income side. Graduated here in the 80s. Very, very talented.
Yeah, I thought she had been with Goldman. I just wanted to make sure that was the right person. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Ruth.
Okay, you've heard the motion, the second. Now we'll have roll call on the election of endowment officers.
Mrs. Artis Neal, yes. Mr. Bullock,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Kobe,
Yes.
Mr. Cochran,
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Duckett, Mrs. Hopkins, Mr. McCullen,
Yes.
Mr. Meekins,
Yes.
Mr. Mosley,
Yes.
Mr. Pryor,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Proceed on, Mr. Pruitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next 3 items are discussion items, the first 2 of which are the semi-annual report on capital construction projects and leasing. I will take both of those first together and see if there are any questions. And all the materials have been provided in it. First, with regard to capital construction, the most important update to note in the last 6 months is something we shared at the last Board of Trustees meeting. In response to the current climate that we're in, the Chancellor and the university have worked to minimize expenditures, and particularly expenditures that are not related to external funding, like bonds approved by the taxpayers of the state or private gifts from donors. And to that end, we have placed $210 million worth of projects on hold, 22 projects. They're listed in detail in the agenda item, and I'd be happy to discuss any of those if you wish. The other important thing to note is that 90% are renovation projects. With regard to leasing, a couple of items to note. Leasing expense increased 2.5% this fiscal year 19-20. That's related to annual escalators that are embedded in the lease agreements and a modest amount of new space. We forecast for fiscal year 2021 that as the Carolina Square 6th floor lease comes online, that our lease expense will increase by 3%, which is in line with the historical averages. In terms of composition, primarily comprised of research centers and institutes, and 60% of the leases are held by the School of Medicine. As we work to achieve savings, we're looking at our entire leasing portfolio, leases that are coming up for renewal, looking to consolidate space, renegotiate rates in order to save money for the university. So if there are any questions about either my comments or the materials provided in advance, I'd be happy to take those now.
Any questions or comments? Thank you for those good updates, Jonathan. Now, if you bring us up to date on financial issues.
Thank you. Yes. Since we've last spoken, we've closed fiscal year, and that, there has not been much change in the report since I gave it to you last time. The largest impact we experienced this fiscal year had to do with our auxiliary services, physician practice plans in the School of Medicine, dentistry, transportation, parking, housing, and dining. The good news is that those operations had significant reserves and fund balance to withstand the shock to the revenues this fiscal year. There were no impacts to tuition receipts, fee receipts, or state appropriations, for which we're very grateful. So we will close this fiscal year with an impact to our cash balances, but still maintaining reserves that are sufficient for the university. Moving to fiscal year 2021, we have been watching closely several variables that may impact our fund streams, and two that are very important and different than last fiscal year. The first of which was the outcome of the state budget for fiscal 2021 and any impact that the state revenue shortfall might have on the university. I would like to say that we're very fortunate and grateful that the General Assembly did not pass on a budget cut this coming fiscal year to the UNC system or UNC-Chapel Hill at this point. We will continue to monitor that as the situation changes, but at this point there's no budget reduction from state appropriations. The second variable that we're following closely is student enrollment, and student enrollment drives revenues in many of our activities, including the auxiliaries, but also in tuition receipts. And as enrollment, there is an enrollment shortfall. You experience tuition shortfalls that translate very quickly in the need to reduce expense. That is important, and just a reminder that state appropriations and tuition are required, can only have a 2% carry forward from one fiscal year to the next. And so given that, you cannot build reserves in those fund sources to sustain a shock to the revenues like you can in auxiliaries. So we are following very closely enrollment levels and the remaining actions that may be taken on the state budget as the year progresses. With that, I'll conclude my remarks and address any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Vice Chancellor Pruitt? No, thank you so much for your updates as always. Trustee Cochran, anything further from the Finance, Infrastructure, and Audit Committee?
Nothing from here.
We now move to University Affairs and call on Trustee Duckett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As usual, which probably some of you are tired of, when I open up the University Affairs, I make a few comments. And I'm going to ramble a little bit, and I'll try and be as brief as possible. We're in crazy times right now, and I want to thank everybody, starting with Kevin, for being a chancellor during these times and showing the kind of leadership and the humble, workman-like attitude that this state and nation needs, but this university desperately needs right now. We made the right decision. I want to congratulate and thank Peter Hines. I've known him a long time. He's a man of high integrity and has unique experience and a sincere commitment to public service. He'll be a great president. I truly believe that for the system. David Powers, I want to thank you from the Board of Governors for being here. I've known you a long time. I know how much you care about all the schools in the system. I know how much you love NC State and beating Carolina, which thankfully doesn't happen as much as some people think. But I love the fact that you care about the entire system and the value to the state. I also want to thank Jim Johnson from the Keenan Flagler Business School, because I spent a long time talking to him the other day, and what a fine man. But I want to thank him for putting into words some of his solutions to problems that he sees and has seen, not just here, but in other higher education, places of higher education. Jim's a sharp man, and I think his frustration with serving on search committees that are perfunctory or and have issues in the way his concerns he raised with me, that we may be steering some faculty in different directions and we need to take a thorough review of that. You know, he's a man worth listening to, and I want to thank him, because pragmatism and common sense and facts matter, and talking to all these people helps me, and people probably get tired of my calls. I also want to state something. I'm a very proud Tar Heel. And I want to be clear about this, because I think sometimes we're in a culture right now where you get a lot of demands, you get a lot of other statements, but I believe in the education and the background behind it. And I would suggest that people, yes, this has been raised. I've gotten emails and texts since I've been in this meeting, and I think this is important. North Carolinians are proud Tar Heels. And I'm hoping that this does not get hijacked from the standpoint of, at times, and through the history of this, that we understand people of all kinds have taken great pride in being Tar Heels, not just University of North Carolina Chapel Hill Tar Heels, but Tar Heels in general. This goes back possibly to the Revolutionary War. There are not documents that prove that. I don't believe in hearsay and basing fact on hearsay, but I think you can go through and read things like in Southern Cultures of why North Carolinians are Tar Heels. It was written by Bruce Baker, I think in 2015. The fact that North Carolinians of all colors, slaves, freemen, white, poor, all kinds of people worked in the maritime industry and in these fields and swamps and things doing business that was very important to this state causes immense pride. And it's hard to say lift those up today at the lowest level and yet say we've got to denigrate those in the past. That's not what this is about. I am very proud to be a Tar Heel. I hope we'd never change that. And I got my moment, so I'm going to slide it in there. I really believe that. But I would also encourage people, as we look forward to what we know is coming here with naming, renaming, and some of this stuff, please take the time to do what is demanded of us today in a positive fashion, to educate, and take the time to read the Pulitzer-winning prize series out of the N&O back in the 90s called The Ghosts of 1898. It's a very powerful and impactful piece. It's shorter, but if you also should take the time to read Wilmington Lies by David Zucchino. These are footnoted, historical, accurate pieces that explain to you what happened during this time and some of the reasons we're being asked to do the things that we do. And I would say, I don't care if you're liberal, conservative, independent, what you are. Sometimes you have to look at it and say, can I defend this name on this building? So let's all lead by being educated, but let's ask that the students and others, please, when you come to us in an educated fashion, not just demanding. Because if I can take the time out of a busy life and do the things that we do and commit to this place, They can take the time to educate on what the real facts are, not what Twitter says and not what Skim or something gives them one time in the morning. It does not take that much time, sorry. I'm through preaching there. We have a number of important items to do in this committee today. Most of it will take place in closed session, but we do have two people to speak to us for the first time, and the first one is the Graduate and Professional Student Federation President Ryan Collins, and I'm assuming Ryan's online, or is he ready to speak? But Ryan, I wish you were here. I look forward to meeting you. You represent a very, very important part of this university and one that is worth hearing from, and we appreciate you doing so.
Thank you very much, Trustee Deckett. And it is good afternoon. It's good to be with you all today. As Trustee Deckett said, my name is Ryan Collins. I'm a third-year JD candidate at the University of North Carolina School of Law. I'm also a proud alum of UNC from the class of 2011. I'm coming to you live today from the historic Alamance County Courthouse in Graham, North Carolina, where I've been doing my summer internship with the DA's office here. And so I want to thank my supervisor for her flexibility in allowing me to be on this call. And I have the privilege of serving as the president of the Graduate and Professional Student Federation. And I want to bring you greetings today on behalf not only of myself, but of our executive branch, as well as our Vice President, Kathleen Furtado, and the entire GPSF Senate. As many of you know, the Graduate and Professional Student Federation serves as the official governing body for the nearly 11,000 post-baccalaureate degree-seeking students here at UNC. We represent an incredibly diverse array of academic and professional programs, from the humanities and social sciences to the fine arts to public health and medicine, business law, social work, and more. Our constituents come from all over the country and the world, including nearly 1,000 international students, whose importance to this institution cannot be overstated. Graduate and professional students contribute every day to this university's success through our research, our teaching, our mentorship of undergraduate and entry-level graduate students, our service in public clinics, and our provision of countless hours of service work to our community, state, and nation. Many of us continue to work full-time jobs, both at UNC and out in the public and private sector. We are parents, caregivers, friends, family members, students, and scholars, but most importantly, we are people. And it deeply saddens me that I'm not able to be there today with you all in person, but I am grateful for the opportunity to speak to the Board of Trustees and to be engaged in university governance. I'm very appreciative to all of the administrators, including Chancellor Guskowitz and Provost Bluen, that have engaged us in conversations over the past several months. Graduate and professional students represent a substantial portion of our community. We represent about 40% of the student body, and that number is only expected to grow as Carolina continues to expand its more than $1 billion research enterprise. As GPSF president, my role is to be the voice and champion of these students, and chief among my goals this year is to continue to grow our presence on campus, to increase our involvement in university decision-making, and to solidify our place in university governance alongside the undergraduate student government, the faculty council, and the employee forum. It is my sincere hope that UNC will draw upon the expertise, skills, and experience of my constituents, of our graduate and professional students, to help develop thoughtful and informed solutions to the many challenges our university faces. We know that this is a difficult time. Trustee Duckett spoke to this a moment ago. This is a very difficult time in the history of our university and our nation, when we're battling not only a deadly pandemic, but also a reckoning with centuries of oppression and institutionalized racism against Black Americans and Indigenous peoples. As both an alumnus and a current student at Carolina, as someone who grew up visiting this campus when my older siblings were here and dreaming of the day when I would receive my acceptance letter, I have a deep and abiding love for this place. And it's for that reason that I want Carolina to recognize its faults and its shortcomings, and to be better, to improve, and if I may borrow the slogan from our advancement campaign, to truly be a campus for all kind. I look forward to working with this distinguished body over the course of the coming year, and I invite you to reach out to me and my team as we delve into the challenges that lie ahead. Thank you for your time today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if folks have them.
Ryan, thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? Thank you so much for being here. All right, next I'm going to move to introduce Dr. Mimi Chapman, who is the new chair of the faculty. She's from the School of Social Work. I've spent time talking to Mimi. The School of Social Work's right behind this building. I happen to be the liaison for the board of the School of Social Work, and they have done amazing work over the years, and I've enjoyed getting to know exactly what they do and how they do it, and I have a lot more to learn. But I would like to thank Mimi for being part of this today. We look forward to working with you. I know you're a person that works very hard and also takes this position very seriously because you speak for the faculty. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Trustee Duckett and Chairman Stevens, for having me this afternoon. I'm very pleased to be with you. My name is Mimi Chapman, and I'm honored to serve as chair of the faculty for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Our faculty is an amazing group of scholars and educators who discover and create new knowledge for the benefit of North Carolinians and indeed the world. As faculty, we bring both a local and a global sensibility to our work, and recognizing this interconnectedness has never been more important than it is at the current moment. If the global COVID pandemic has shown us anything, it is how completely we are tied to one another, both through visible connections and invisible webs. Faculty, staff, students, administration, and bodies like yours function best when we recognize our common interests and work together to protect the health and well-being of the whole. I come from the School of Social Work, as Trustee Duckett said, a place that prides itself on understanding the importance of how different systems, from family systems to schools to government bodies, and indeed different parts of universities, interact and intersect to produce particular outcomes. Social workers are boundary spanners that help systems understand each other and work together for the benefit of all, a role I've occupied throughout my professional life. I hope to bring that lens to my work as faculty chair, being the voice of a faculty that will seldom speak with just one voice, and bringing your perspectives back to my faculty colleagues. Right now, many on our campus, faculty, staff, and students are deeply worried, as I know many of you must be too. Faculty are concerned about doing a good job for the students they love to work with and wonder if they can do that in an online setting or a mass-to-mass environment. Those that are parents are navigating the complex school arrangements that have just been outlined this week by the governor. Some are taking care of elders whose health they are worried about risking if they are coming regularly to campus and then returning home to them. Yet our faculty are scholars and they value the science, data, and ethical frameworks that our colleagues from medicine and public health and philosophy, among many other disciplines, are bringing to this crisis. My goal in all of this is to help our faculty share their concerns and their hopes for the return to campus, help them bring their expertise and creativity to the table, and encourage information sharing and transparency across this complex university system. I respect the hard work of our Chancellor and his administrative team, and the hard work that you all are doing to create a safe return to campus this fall and for all you do for Carolina. I want to be a partner in that work. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if I can be of help in understanding faculty perspectives or in any other way. I look forward to working with you for the next 3 years, and I thank you for inviting me to join you today. I'm also happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Mimi, thank you. Anybody have questions for Mimi? Mimi, I have one. If you have one primary concern that you put at the top of the list for the faculty as a whole, what is that right now? And I know that's putting you on the spot, but sometimes we need to break down levels. So what is the foremost concern of faculty today?
I think that at a meeting, we had a community conversation a number of weeks ago, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago now, 3 weeks ago, I would say. And at that conversation, one theme that emerged was recognizing that although this pandemic affects everyone, it affects everyone differently and sometimes disproportionately. And so I think the overriding concern is how we are navigating this in a way that to navigate this so that we are not in separate boats, but that we're in a flotilla, supporting one another, moving the entire group forward. I would say that is the concern, is making sure that the plans that are put in place respect the diversity of experiences and concerns that people have. And I think that, certainly the roadmap is trying to do that, and that with each new piece of information and the fact that it's a flexible living plan allows that to be a real possibility.
Great.
Does that
Thank
answer
you.
your question?
No, that's a good answer. Any answer I think is a good one, honestly, but I do think that's very important to realize that so many people are affected differently by this pandemic, and it's a crazy time. Everybody's living off of 19 spreadsheets of what if, and that's just part of it, because the what if changes every day. So we appreciate your being here, and thank you for your remarks.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we'll cover the rest of this in closed session, so that would conclude my remarks at this point.
Thank you, Trustee Duckett, and welcome Dr. Chapman to your new role, and Ryan to your new role as well. We look forward to working with both of you. And Shanna Hill is not here today, but if you didn't know, she's been reelected as chair of the Employee Forum, and we'll look forward to working with her as well. So thank you all. Let's now turn to the External Relations Committee and Trustee Davis.
Thank you, Chair Stevens. In the interest of time, I'd like to turn this over to Clayton Summers, Vice Chancellor for Public Affairs and Secretary of the University, for a public affairs update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and once again, a happy belated birthday to you from yesterday. A couple of updates for you today, one on the federal side and then secondly on the state side. At the federal level, as you recall, back in March, Congress passed the CARES Act funding, which provided substantial relief to states and even our own university. They are now in the process of trying to negotiate an additional package. As you may recall, the Democrat-led House of Representatives passed the HEROES Act, which provided about $3 trillion in types of funding. The Senate has indicated they're looking at more of a less than $1 trillion package, along with some liability protections and some focuses on children, healthcare, and jobs. So a little work to be done there. We're going to watch them very closely because not only are we looking for additional funding to states to help relief, but also some flexibility provisions regarding the CARES Act funding. We'll come back to that in a minute. If you recall, part of the General Assembly had allocated the $29 million to the collaboratory. That was some of the CARES Act funding, but there are some additional funds to talk about shortly. So stay tuned and watch the federal government. They should be back next week in terms of negotiating that bill, so we'll follow it very carefully. At the state level, the General Assembly adjourned their short session last week, and they are scheduled to come back September 2nd. However, Governor Cooper may well call them back before then if either the federal government acts in such a way that requires state action sooner, or some of the fiscal numbers come back in that would necessitate some of the budget corrections for this fiscal year. A couple of key bills to talk about that affect UNC. One was House Bill 1096 with some of the UNC omnibus changes. A couple of policy provisions in there that are important. One is it eliminates the Board of Governors' approval of certain salary actions that have proven to be a little bit challenging sometimes from a logistics and timing standpoint. It also requires the Board of Governors to study the feasibility of accelerated undergraduate degree programs. House Bill 1079 is corrected a potential sales tax issue that our own tax counsel, Ben Davidson, spotted. And I'm not sure how many of you know Ben, but Ben has the eagle eye on tax issues, and he has, more than one occasion, has raised substantial issues that literally no one else in the system saw. This could have potentially had some sales tax applicability to our online courses. And if you think about what happened this past spring, that could have had a very big negative impact on the state that was unintended. So Ben and Amy Auth worked with the General Assembly as well as the Department of Revenue to find some fixes for that. So we're very thankful that that got cleared up. House Bill 1081 was our self-liquidating bill that allows the $2 million for Moorhead Chemistry Lab, HVAC upgrades, and also $6.5 million for campus life safety upgrades. So again, that's a self-liquidating bill, and thanks to Jonathan and his team for helping us get through that. Finally, Chancellor Guskiewicz mentioned this, Senate Bill 212, important for a number of reasons. One, it allocated $39.1 million to the UNC system for R&R needs. Also allows chancellors now to approve small capital projects up to $600,000. That's important. Another provision that's changed is they did increase the carry forward from 2.5% to 5%, but number one, you can only use those funds to R&R, and number two, any amounts you carry forward, you hold back for above the 2.5% up to 5% is a split. So the campus retains half of that. The system office gets half of that to distribute across the system as they see fit. So that is a change going forward that applies to this fiscal year coming up, not to the past one we just closed out. The two capital projects that Chancellor Guskiewicz mentioned, the business school number one received $14 million in planning money towards their new building. $7 million of that is in there. An additional $7 million will be appropriated if we get CARES Act flexibility. And by that, I mean, they did use the COVID money from the CARES Act to put $7 million towards that project. So if the federal government gives the flexibility that we're hoping that they do, then it will go from 7 to 14 million. Secondly, it was assigned a project number in the State Capital Infrastructure Fund, the SCIF, for up to $150 million to be appropriated for the construction. Half of that is there's a match component there where the business school has 2 years to raise $75 million towards that. Dean Shackelford is well on his way towards getting that. So we're very excited about that project. Perhaps another project is the School of Nursing. They were appropriated $5 million in planning money. Again, the same 2.5 split where 2.5 is given, 2.5 is subject to the CARES Act flexibility. If for whatever reason the CARES Act flexibility is not given by Congress, and we think that they will do that, but if it's not, the General Assembly does have some contingency plans to come back and hopefully backfill those two contingency funds. It also assigned a project in the SCIF and up to $45 million in construction funds. This does not mean these projects will be funded for certain. However, as Chairman Stevens recalls, once you get into the SCIF and once you are given your planning money, which will get you through not just the design but the construction documents, and the state has made significant multi-million investments, you're pretty much on your way towards getting those funded. So, of course, depends on the state revenue situation, the budget forecast, and available funds. But we are very hopeful and optimistic that both those projects will move forward soon. They're both exceptional projects. And it's important to note that the deans did not lobby and campaign for these projects. These were coming from primarily Speaker Moore, who had heard about the projects. He did come to campus and visited and saw himself the nursing school in particular and the problems with that building. And so, again, these were the General Assembly and Speaker Moore in particular coming to us saying, I know there's some needs there, let me understand better what they are. So we really do appreciate and echo the Chancellor's comments about thanking the General Assembly. So all things considered, we did have a very good short session. However, as Jonathan mentioned, the going forward is a little bit of an uncertainty right now. There's a multi-billion-dollar shortfall in the state budget. When you move the tax deadline from April 15th to July 15th, that has a number of impacts on the budget. So we don't know what's going to hold in the future, but we should prepare for reduction in appropriations as all state governments should. We're going to keep working with our leaders to mitigate as best we can against that, and we'll keep advocating for Chapel Hill as best we can. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll take any questions.
Are there any questions for Vice Chancellor Summers? I would like to take this opportunity to thank Vice Chancellor Summers and his team for their continued outstanding advocacy at both the state level and federal level. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chancellor. That ends my report, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll echo your kind remarks about Clayton and his staff. We're soon going to go into closed session, take up some appropriate things there. We'll be back. I don't know when, how long that will take. We'll be in closed session. Before we do that, though, I want to, again, thank the board for the action you took today in a thoughtful, thorough, deliberative manner to establish guidelines for us. We don't meet again until September, normally. With the opening of school and the issues related to that, we may very well need to have a special meeting related just to that. But in addition, I spoke to the Chancellor at the break, and we've encouraged him, and he's going to speak in just a minute, to move expeditiously with the process of our policy we just adopted. And so I anticipate a special board meeting being called in the near future.
Yes, thanks, Chair Stevens. I just want to thank the board for the decision that was made today. I think this is an important next step to move us forward. I've already started forming that committee. I believe that we will be able to convene that group very shortly. We're going to move expeditiously. I think this is important that we move to make a recommendation to the board on this initial resolution from the History, Race, and Way Forward Commission. And so I will ask that committee to convene quickly, to report back to me with their report by next Wednesday, such that I could be prepared to produce a recommendation and a report back to the board by next Thursday. And then we can, I would hope, be able to convene a special meeting by July 31st, if at all possible.
Thank you, Chancellor. Let me now recognize Secretary Artis Neal for a motion to go into closed session.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board convene in closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute, Section 143-318.11, subsection A, subsection 1, to prevent the disclosure of privileged information under Section 126-22, and also pursuant to the following subsections, subsection A2, 3, 5, 6, 7, and 9.
Heard the motion. Is there a second?
Second, Trustee Davis.
Trustee Davis, second. Further discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion will please answer the roll call.
Ms. Artis Neal, yes. Mr. Bullock?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Kobe?
Yes.
Mr. Cochran?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Duckett?
Yes.
Mrs. Hopkins?
Yes.
Mr. McCullen?
Yes.
Mr. Meekins?
Yes.
Mr. Mosley?
Yes.
Mr. Pryor?
Yes.
And Mr. Stevens?
Yes. We will be in closed session in just a few moments. Thank you, everyone who participated so far. And Governor Powers, again, especially thank you. I think you told us at this point you'll be heading out, but we so much thank you for being with us. You're welcome to any meeting. And we look forward to that live time when you can speak to a public gathering on this campus.
I'll look forward to that. Thank you all for your hospitality today. And I'll look forward, like I say, please feel free to reach out. If you ever got any questions, just let me know.
Again, we will be in closed session, and we'll need a few minutes to set up for that. For those of you watching, I can't predict the amount of time, but we do have several action items in closed session, and we'll be back in public session as soon as we can. Okay, we are back in open session, and I recognize Trustee Duckett for a report from the University Affairs Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 5 items coming out of closed session personnel-related items as a motion for approval, 4 personnel items, and 1 compliance report adoption. So I bring them forward as a motion for approval to the full board.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second? Second by Trustee Davis. Secretary Neal, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Artis Neal, yes. Mr. Bolick,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Kobe,
Yes.
Mr. Cochran, Mr. Cochran. Okay. Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Duckett,
Yes.
Mrs. Hopkins, Mr. McCullen,
Yes.
Mr. Meekins,
Yes.
Mr. Mosley, Mr. Pryor,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes, motion adopted. Thank you, Trustee Duckett. Is there further business to come before the board? Trustee Davis?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn, second by Trustee Pryor. Is there further discussion? If not, all in favor, we'll call the roll.
Ms. Artis Neal, yes. Mr. Bolick,
Yes.
Mr. Brown, yes. Mr. Kobe,
Yes.
Mr. Cochran, Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Duckett,
Yes.
Mrs. Hopkins, Mr. McCullen,
Yes.
Mr. Meekins,
Yes.
Mr. Mosley, Mr. Pryor,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes, motion passes and we stand adjourned.